Hi, I'm Rachel Eliza Griffiths, and I am so happy to be reading a selection of poems for you for Poets House Presents. I'm completely honored and thrilled to read poems from my new collection, Seeing the Body. It's out now, and I'm just going to read some poems to you and say thank you. The first poem I'd like to read to you is called Chronology. What I need to tell you about chronology is that it is a semi-ekphrastic poem, which means it is written in conversation with a work of visual art. And in this particular poem, I am writing towards a exhibit that was featured at the Guggenheim some years ago now, of the artist Alberto Burri, an Italian artist who was also a doctor, and many things, but this show was called The Trauma of Painting, and Seeing the Body is about my mother's life, my grief in her death, and the transformation of my own life through that grief, but also through the practice of art and language. Chronology. I don't remember when her name begins in the world. I forget what maiden word the water made against my mother's tongue. Unbroken thirst, black earth, darkness singing blue and green, fruit trees of her hands. Animals roar her blood into bright air, ghosts scrape brown rivers upon her skin, the teeth of the dead tear her unbroken words into rafts. My mother's maiden name is Prey. She is a pure being of blood, promise, trouble. Perhaps I was there, gaining details. Wonder corrodes our armor of ribs and speech. Contours breaching the wave that will widow our family. Her breath going down and staying beneath its darkest tongue. The water recalling who the earth believed she was before the god. I want to open my mother's dead hands and listen. Let the human record show our slant of suffering. Let come and rain lash chokecherry leaves with desire, pain, imagination. Show me how the art of losing masters each morning. The mind of the earth turned like a heart after death. Our wounds took the form of night. Our fears rocked like white, tearful waves against the last ships. Our mothers rolled like shells under the raging sea, which means by what I must write in blood. My naked hand labored through the bruised dark to speak, which means language is neither innocent nor free. A woman swells alone inside mauve fields. A grief makes its own blood. The petals beneath me have already changed. The wound of life gave the night endless shame and would not close its mouth. I'd now like to read to you a poem that's called Certified, and I think it's self-explanatory. Certified. We had to prove everything. My mother was born Tuesday, August 31st, 1954. On that weekday, inside the womb of a minute, she burst from another woman's life, gasping her first breath of light in a demolished room at DC General Hospital, which no longer exists, and the extraordinary ways my mother no longer exists. I hope she was swaddled tightly at her birth. Shit and mucus wiped away from her small brown face. her story, gossamer, almost unobserved, streamed like a tender moonlit kite from a spider's belly. Inside her, I was already waiting. My mother went to school, fainted in class from hunger. Her little brother Pascal drowned in a DC city pool. My mother walked like other poor Black girls to class with cardboard for the soles of her shoes, fought rats for the white bread in the kitchen cupboard, her family's living room furniture on the sidewalk. Her mother dead at 36 from cervical cancer, which makes the velvet sack of red clots weary in me. My future. My mother got her GED. Decades later, she'd have a college diploma. For years, she gave paper, her paranoia, her respect, her grudges. Whatever was written was law. Made history liable even when it lied. Then paper wrapped around her body, around her organs. Her medical files could fill a school, a mansion, insurance and charts, x-rays, letters from specialists, the results of tests that would judge her impossible future impossible. So many referrals, so many prescriptions. It was another language. A loosening hammock of alphabets and symbols provoked her night and day, insomnia at her heels like the claws of a leopard, spotted and quickly at her throat before she could swallow. Each diagnosis sustained a lie that she might make it, at least get by. The donor forms, the miscellaneous handwritten symptoms that stacked and scattered like the savage tongues of Babel. I'd bring home homework until she could no longer help me, could no longer make sense of the equations. There were recipes she cooked, maps and illegible manuals of meds to keep her here with us. Blood pressure, cholesterol, anti-rejection, vitamins for endless deficiencies. Then the death certificate, multi-organ failure, July 28th, 2014, time of death, 7:09 p.m. A piece of paper signed by a woman named Natalie. A simple statement of the body ceasing, a cavity of boxes, a necessary form without breath. We had to wait until the certificate got signed by who and who and who to say she would not come back. Then I had these dreams where I was writing at a desk, the table made out of glass. She'd come up and stand behind me, sounding out the words. When I looked down, there was no paper, just her dead face trapped under the glass casket that I inscribed with what I was trying to remember. When I turned to look over my shoulder, there was no body, no mother, no, nothing but cobwebs of words. Zombies twisted out of paper, holding their arms out until I begged them, begged myself to let my mother be. This poem is called Name, and so this is just an excerpt from that poem. A dead woman is always looking at a book or a mirror or at the sea. She is looking for edges where her face dissolves into depths. Memories she licks and places her fingers inside so they won't fall apart. It's precise and wonderful, the beeswax melting over her nipples and her mind. What is preserved in grief cannot be golden, cannot be burned down to make anything but a story or idol. Yes, it is true. I am lifting my mother towards the glittering gods who lash the rivers of my dreams with light. Yes, I am opening myself for the black-horned galaxies where the soul hides, endangered by its unknown gibbering alphabet. There was music I only knew by the ringing of my teeth. And when pleasure sang me open and hot, I offered my cries to all dead mothers, so bruised and beloved by their gods. But now, what does ripeness have to do with me anymore? Afterwards, emptied and emptying, I stood near a window and looked down at the naked world my mother loved so much. She smiled as she was leaving the empire of her body. Even now, she is still making me. What love cannot colonize, it burns. My mother's maiden name is a verb, pray. I name you Mother. The dead woman in the dark tells me a story so wide the loneliness falls away. I'm left with the toil of pleasure, the cry of other animals eating more bones than the earth herself can swallow. Sometimes I have a name, which means there is still a desire in me to ask why. The galaxy has told me there is nothing but matter to destroy itself, make itself, create the hope we do not end. This poem is called Good Death, and what I will say to you very quickly is that when my mother died, a number of people in the kindest manner possible asked me if my mother had had a good death. And I think what they were asking me, was she alone? Was she surrounded by love? Did she drift off in a dream? At that time, I found this phrase very off-putting because all I could think about and feel was that she was gone. But I know now that she did have a good death because she was surrounded by her family and by the love we gave her as she left us. And so when I mention the phrase good death and think about that, it's the terms, which is very natural, of how one dies, how one leaves and returns, and what violence or peace is around that becoming, that ebbing. So this is good death. Of words placed in their best black clothes, of that darkness full, of my mother's laughter forged of great dust that spilled its golden light into her tomb, of the copper wreath carved upon her copper vault. God and Mother, I must speak to you. I must say, it is good, our death. Of the ivory city, bones like trumpets blowing my mother away from me in song. Of the city again, where doves and vultures welcome my mother's life. Of the road between her dates, a short slash, a bridge ends in oblivion. Mother, you never end. Of the pronunciation of sorrow forever mine, each astonishing summer, of the snake who suffered our story of knowledge and shame, of the afterlife and its downpour of ordinary rights, of the ordinary rights I enact and my broken thoughts, of my fever waving its anguish until the match goes out in disbelief, of Michael Brown bleeding without mercy beneath the concrete roof of God, God, and God, of the peace and suffering Black people have been promised, of the clean white clothes I gave my mother's undertaker. Here are the stockings I said, not knowing whether they would match my mother's skin or death, of the poems I've been trying to write, Die, I say, go elsewhere for songs of the food and the appetite, of my father's shoulders in a black suit, of the downpour against sunlight. The world in friendship returns my tears, of the wildest animals who charge at me with their horns when I offer my pentameter of ribs, of my mother's visitations, of the messages I have missed, of the hot comb I cradled on my knees in the bathroom, of the brutal gospel of hair, untouched toothbrush, clothes in closets with sales tags, of dreams where my teeth scatter like maple leaves, of what I will never remember. There is no end of remembering, of the rain that makes my howls float like empty bottles of glass, of the dreams where my hot white clothes grow flames, of what I will remember, remembering about love, of the neon-colored nail polish on my mother's hand I held at her deathbed, of what I hated to ask the night and gods, of my knees that remember the orange mud before the grass grew back on her grave, of the strange, concerned question poured like sulfur over my side where I was trying to leave my skin, of it being over again and again, of it beginning. They asked me, was it a good death? Was it a good death? Was there peace for all of us? Why should I want peace instead of my mother, of the mothers who have always known the ache of the earth while holding children in their wombs? Why wasn't I told you'd leave me? Now I walk into the sea with my jewel of anguish and shake my mother's, these shining human flowers, from my bald, newborn skull. Thank you so much for listening to me read poems to you from my new book, Seeing the Body. And thank you always to Poets House. This community, I am just absolutely honored to be a part of and to support in any way I can. And with the world being the world it is right now, I hope that poetry continues to be one of our flags, one of the songs we sing and march by. And it's so strange to read on a video, but here we are. Poets House is one of my absolute favorite poetry homes in New York City and maybe on the planet. I have been overjoyed to have the presence and community of Poets House in my life over many years now. Their mission and what they have achieved and the vision they have of what is possible for poetry in relationship to all of our lives is something that I have always viscerally felt when I visited Poets House, when I've had an art show there, and just to go there and hold fellowship with reading, to go and to read and to be there. I don't think I've ever been and not seen a poet there or a reader, and there feels something very special about that.
If you've enjoyed these programs, please consider giving a contribution to Poets House. For more than 30 years, they've kept the door wide open to everyone for the joy of poetry. Recently, they have temporarily had to shut the door and are reeling from the financial implications. Please give, even a small donation if you can. Thank you.